The old Zephyrian commander stood before the group of young cadets in the military academy. His forearms were crossed behind his back, and his silver scales caught the light from the ceiling. Commander Vexthal had seen many battles in his long life. His eyes held memories that most beings would never want to carry. "Today I will tell you about humans," he said in his deep voice. "You think you know about war. You think you understand what it means to fight. But until you have faced humans in battle, you know nothing." The young cadets sat quietly. Some were Zephyrian like their commander. Others came from different worlds across the galaxy. All of them had heard stories about the Terran Galactic War. But stories were just stories. Commander Vexthal had been there. "The first time I met humans in battle was at Kepler Station," Vexthal began. "It was a mining colony on the outer rim. Nothing special. Just rocks and metal and a few thousand workers. We thought it would be easy to take." He walked slowly in front of the cadets as he spoke. His clawed feet made soft clicking sounds on the metal floor. "I was younger then. Still believed that all species thought the same way about war. You fight until the cost becomes too high. Then you surrender. Simple math. Simple logic. That is, how civilized beings conduct war." One of the cadets raised her hand. "Commander, what made this battle different?" Vexthal's mandibles clicked together. It was the Zephyrian way of showing dark humor. "Everything," he said. "We had 2,000 soldiers. The humans had maybe 300 defenders. We had better weapons, better armor, better ships. We surrounded their station completely, no way in or out. Any reasonable species would have asked for terms." He stopped walking and looked directly at the cadets. The human commander was Captain Jake Morrison. I learned his name later from the records. He was 34 years old, had a wife and 2 children back on Earth. Before the war, he taught children at a school. Not a soldier by birth, just a man who answered his people's call when war came. Vexthal's voice grew quieter. The cadets had to lean forward to hear him. "We sent the usual surrender demand, standard procedure. Lay down your weapons. Surrender. The station. Your lives will be spared. We even offered good treatment for prisoners. The Zephyrian Empire follows the rules of war." "What did Captain Morrison reply?" asked another cadet. He said no. Vexthal's eyes seemed to look through the wall behind the cadets. "Just no. Not even a counteroffer. No request for better terms. No attempt to negotiate. Simply no." The commander began walking again. "So we began the siege. Cut off their power. Blocked their supply ships. Jammed their communications. Standard siege tactics. We waited for hunger and darkness to do our work for us. Much cheaper than fighting." "How long did you wait?" a young Altarian cadet asked. 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, something happened that I still do not understand. The humans opened their airlocks. Several cadets looked confused. "Not to let us in," Vexthal explained. "They came out, all of them." Captain Morrison led about 200 soldiers in a direct charge across open ground toward our main battle line. The room was completely silent now. I was commanding the 3rd Assault Group. We had perfect positions. High ground. Cover. Clear fields of fire. The humans had to cross 800 meters of empty space to reach us. No cover. No support. No hope. Vexthal stopped walking again. I remember thinking that the humans had finally broken. That fear had driven them mad. I almost felt sorry for them. Such a waste of life over a simple mining station. "But they kept coming," he continued. "We opened fire immediately. Our plasma rifles cut through their ranks like fire through paper. I watched human soldiers fall every few steps. But the others did not stop, did not take cover, did not retreat. They just kept running toward us." One of the cadets made a small sound of shock. "I have seen many species fight," Vexthal said. "Most will charge for a short distance, but when losses become too heavy, survival instinct takes over. They seek cover or pull back. It is natural. It is sane. Not humans. They kept coming even as their friends died beside them. I saw one human soldier take a plasma blast to the chest. He fell but kept crawling forward until he died. Another lost her arm but kept running with her rifle in her good hand. The commander's voice was barely above a whisper now. We killed half of them in the first 2 minutes. Any other species would have broken. But Captain Morrison was still running at the front, still leading, still coming straight at us. Vexthal turned to face the cadets directly. That was when I began to understand that something was wrong. This was not madness. This was not panic. These humans had a plan. What kind of plan? Asked a cadet. While we were focused on the main attack, a small group of humans had stayed behind in the station, led by Lieutenant Katie Brooks. She was 26 years old, an expert with explosives. While her friends were dying to hold our attention, she was working in the station's power core. The room felt very cold suddenly. The human charge was never meant to succeed, Vexthal explained. It was meant to keep us looking the wrong way. Captain Morrison and his soldiers knew they were going to die. They ran into our guns knowing it was hopeless, but they were buying time. For what? Lieutenant Brooks had connected antimatter charges to the station's main reactor. Enough explosive power to turn the entire facility into a small sun. She was going to destroy the station rather than let us have it. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. We realized what was happening when our sensors detected the energy buildup. Too late to stop it. Too late to evacuate completely. The explosion killed Lieutenant Brooks instantly. It also killed the remaining human defenders. And it killed 800 of my soldiers. Vexthal was quiet for a long moment. Captain Morrison died 20 meters from our battle line, still charging, still fighting. He never knew if his plan worked, but he trusted his people to finish the job. Commander, one cadet said slowly, why did the humans not just threaten to destroy the station? You might have withdrawn rather than lose so many soldiers. Vexthal's mandibles clicked again. Because threats can be negotiated. Bluffs can be called. The humans did not want to bargain. They wanted to send a message to every Zephyrian commander in the fleet. What message? That there is no prize worth taking if humans decide you cannot have it. That they will destroy everything rather than let it fall into enemy hands. That they count the cost of war differently than we do. The commander walked to the window and looked out at the stars. After Kepler Station, our strategy changed. We stopped trying to capture human facilities intact. We knew they would be booby-trapped or destroyed. We stopped expecting human defenders to surrender when surrounded. We learned to expect the unexpected. He turned back to the cadets. But the real lesson of Kepler Station was not about tactics or strategy. It was about the human mind. They do not calculate acceptable losses the way we do. They do not weigh their own lives against military objectives the way other species do. How do they calculate? Asked a cadet. They do not, Vexthal said simply. When humans decide something must be done, they do it regardless of the cost. Captain Morrison did not count his soldiers as numbers on a report. He saw them as people willing to die for something bigger than themselves. The commander looked at each cadet in turn. That is what makes humans so dangerous in war. They fight like every battle is their last battle, like every cause is worth any sacrifice. Most species fight to live. Humans will die to win. The cadets sat in stunned silence as Commander Vexthal's words sank in. Outside the window, the stars seemed a little less bright than before. Commander Vexthal moved away from the window and faced his young cadets again. The memory of Kepler Station still hung heavy in the air like smoke from an old fire, but the old Zephyrian warrior had more stories to tell, stories that would teach these young minds what they truly faced when they encountered humans in battle. Kepler Station taught us that humans would rather destroy than surrender, he said, but we still thought we understood the rules of war. Cut off supplies. Wait for hunger and desperation to do the work. Every species breaks eventually, when their people begin to starve. A young cadet raised his hand. Did this strategy not work? Against humans, Commander? Vexthal's 4 eyes blinked slowly. That brings me to my second story. The Siege of New Montana. 47 days that changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. The commander began his slow walk across the front of the classroom again. His clawed feet clicked against the metal floor in a steady rhythm. New Montana was a farming colony. 2 million humans lived there. Men, women, children, elderly. Not soldiers. Just ordinary people trying to build new lives on a distant world. They grew food for dozens of other human colonies, rich soil, good climate, perfect target for a blockade. He paused and looked at one of the cadets. Tell me, young one, how long would your people last without food shipments? The cadet thought for a moment. Perhaps 10 days, Commander. Maybe 15 if we rationed carefully. Exactly what we expected. From humans. Vexthal nodded. Our intelligence said they had maybe 2 weeks of stored food. Standard for most colonies. We positioned our fleet around the planet. No ships in or out. No supply runs. No emergency deliveries. We waited for the calls for surrender to begin. But they never came? Asked another cadet. Oh, they came, Vexthal said with that clicking sound that meant dark humor. But not the calls we expected. The commander stopped walking and turned to face the cadets directly. The planetary defense commander was Colonel Steve Hamilton, 42 years old, career military man. He had fought in 3 previous wars, but more important, he understood his people. He knew what humans could endure when they had to. Vexthal's voice grew quieter as he continued. On the 3rd day of the blockade, Colonel Hamilton made a planet-wide broadcast. I heard the recording. Later, he told his people that help was not coming, that they were on their own, that they would have to choose between surrender and survival. What did they choose? A cadet asked. They chose both, Vexthal replied. Colonel Hamilton announced food rationing, 400 calories per person per day. For perspective, that is about 1/4 of what a healthy adult needs to maintain normal activity. Several cadets made sounds of shock. We thought they would last maybe a week on such rations before riots began, before desperate parents demanded surrender to feed their children. Any reasonable species would have broken in days. The commander walked to his desk and picked up a data pad. Instead, something else happened. The chief medical officer was Dr. Lisa Chen, 36 years old, mother of 3 children. She began organizing the colony's medical response to starvation, not to treat it, but to manage it. Vexthal read from the datapad. Dr. Chen set up medical stations in every district. She trained ordinary citizens to recognize the signs of dangerous malnutrition. She created exercise programs to help people maintain muscle mass on reduced calories. She even worked with the colony's chemists to create vitamin supplements from local plants. He set the datapad down. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was how the civilians responded. Parents gave their food portions to their children. Adults gave their portions to the elderly. Everyone found ways to stretch every meal. They ate things that other species would never consider food. What kind of things? Asked a cadet. Tree bark ground into flour, grass boiled into soup, insects, roasted and seasoned. They harvested algae from the water treatment plants and called it protein. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was thrown away. Vexthal's voice carried a note of grudging respect. The mayor was Paul Johnson, 64 years old. Before the war, he sold farming equipment. Not a military man, but he understood organization. He turned the entire colony into a war factory. While people were starving, a cadet asked in disbelief. Because people were starving, Vexthal corrected. Mayor Johnson converted civilian factories to produce weapons and ammunition. Children as young as 12 years old worked in the ammunition plants. Teenagers operated the weapons factories. The elderly repaired equipment and maintained machinery. The commander began walking again. Every family became a military unit. Mothers taught their children to shoot. Fathers showed their sons how to build explosives from farming chemicals. Grandparents passed down knowledge of surviving hard times from old wars. But surely they grew weaker as time passed, suggested a cadet. Vexthal's mandibles clicked. That is what we expected, what we planned for. But humans are not like other species. Instead of growing weaker, they grew harder, more determined, more unified. He stopped and faced the cadets again. Dr. Chen worked 18-hour days in makeshift hospitals. She performed surgery by candlelight to save electrical power. When medical supplies ran low, she created new medicines from local materials. When painkillers were gone, She taught patients to endure surgery without them. The room was completely silent. Colonel Hamilton organized the defense with military precision, but he also walked among the civilians every day. He visited the factories. He ate in the communal kitchens. He slept in the same bunkers as ordinary families. The people saw their leader sharing their hardships. Vexthal picked up the datapad again. By day 20, we intercepted communications from the surface. We expected to hear desperation, calls for help, demands for surrender. Instead, we heard work schedules, production reports, training programs. Training for what? For ground combat. Colonel Hamilton knew we would eventually have to land troops, so he prepared his people. 2 million civilians became 2 million potential soldiers. Every factory worker learned to use a rifle. Every farmer learned to make bombs. Every child learned to carry messages and supplies. The commander's voice grew softer. On day 31, something happened that I will never forget. Our sensors detected a massive energy surge from the planet's surface. We thought they were trying to send a distress signal. Instead, they were celebrating. Celebrating what? The birth of a baby. Dr. Chen had delivered a healthy child in one of the underground shelters. The entire colony celebrated for 3 days. In the middle of starvation and war, they found joy in new life. Vexthal set down the datapad and looked directly at the cadets. That was when I began to understand that we were not fighting a normal enemy. These humans were not breaking down under pressure. They were becoming something stronger, something more dangerous. What happened when you finally landed troops? Asked a cadet. Disaster, Vexthal said simply. We expected to find weak, desperate people ready to surrender for food. Instead, we found an enemy that had grown harder and more united with each passing day. The commander walked to the back of the room. Our first landing force was 5,000 soldiers, elite troops, the best equipment. We landed at dawn expecting quick victory. By sunset, half my soldiers were dead or wounded. How? The humans fought like they had nothing left to lose, because they had already given up everything except the will to resist. They used their knowledge of the terrain. They used weapons made from farming equipment. They used tactics that no military academy teaches. Vexthal's voice carried admiration despite himself. Mayor Johnson led civilian fighters with hunting rifles against our armored vehicles. Dr. Chen treated wounded fighters in mobile medical stations that moved constantly to avoid our attacks. Colonel Hamilton coordinated defense from command, posts that changed location every few hours. But surely hunger weakened them. Hunger made them desperate. Desperation made them creative. Creativity made them deadly. They fought with the fury of people protecting their families, not the calculated aggression of professional soldiers. The commander returned to the front of the room. On day 47, our high command ordered a full retreat. We had lost too many soldiers trying to take one farming colony. The cost was too high. You withdrew? We had no choice. The humans had taught us something terrible. They could endure hardships that would destroy other species. They could grow stronger under pressure that would break stronger armies. Most frightening of all, they could turn ordinary citizens into effective soldiers in just a few weeks. Vexthal looked at each cadet. New Montana changed our entire approach to fighting humans. We stopped trying to starve them into surrender. We learned that human endurance is not just physical, it is psychological. They can convince themselves that any suffering is acceptable if the cause is important enough. The old commander's voice grew very quiet. That is the second lesson about human warfare. They do not just fight with their bodies or their weapons. They fight with their minds. And the human mind can endure things that would drive other species insane. The cadets sat in stunned silence as the full meaning of the story sank in. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance, but somehow they seemed less distant than before. Commander Vexthal looked out at his cadets and saw the confusion in their young faces. They were trying to understand how humans could be so different from every other species in the galaxy. The old warrior knew that his next story would confuse them even more. You think you are beginning to understand humans, he said slowly. You have learned that they will die rather than surrender. You have learned that they grow stronger under pressure. But I have not told you the most disturbing thing about human warfare yet. A young Altarian cadet shifted nervously in her seat. What could be more disturbing than what we have already heard, Commander? Vexathal's mandibles clicked in that way that meant he was remembering something painful. The most disturbing thing about humans is not how they treat their enemies. It is how they treat their prisoners, how they can show mercy when you least expect it, how they can turn that mercy into a weapon more powerful than any gun. The commander began his familiar walk across the front of the room. But this time his steps seemed heavier, more troubled. This happened at Proxima Base. It was one of our forward supply stations. Not heavily defended, maybe 500 Zephyrian soldiers. We used it to store equipment and fuel for our fleet operations in that sector. He stopped walking and faced the cadets. The human attack came without warning, a full assault by 2,000 human Marines, led by General Rick Carter, 51 years old, a career soldier who had fought in more battles than most of us could count. He was known for being efficient and ruthless in combat. The attack was perfectly planned. Vexthal continued. The humans cut through our defenses like they were made of paper. Superior numbers, better tactics, complete surprise. Within 6 hours, Proxima Base was theirs. One of the cadets raised his hand. Commander, this sounds like a normal military victory. What made it different? Vexthal's 4 eyes blinked slowly. What made it different was what happened after the fighting stopped. We had 300 wounded Zephyrian soldiers. Standard procedure in war is simple. Prisoners get basic medical care, enough to keep them alive for questioning, nothing more. The commander's voice grew quieter. The humans did something that made no sense. They gave our wounded soldiers the same medical treatment they gave their own wounded. The same drugs, the same surgery, the same care. Several cadets looked confused. I was one of those wounded, Vexthal explained. Plasma burns on 2 of my arms, shrapnel in my chest. I was dying slowly and I knew it. I expected the humans to let me die or maybe speed up the process. Instead, a human medic worked on me for 3 hours. Her name was Sergeant Amy Watson, 28 years old. She had trained as a doctor before joining the military. She could have been anywhere else treating human soldiers who were her own people. Instead, she was trying to save the life of an enemy who had been trying to kill her friends just hours before. Vexthal lifted one of his arms and showed the cadets a long scar. Sergeant Watson cut me open and pulled out 17 pieces of metal shrapnel, one by one, while I was awake. She talked to me the whole time, asked about my family, told me about hers, like we were old friends instead of enemies. The room was completely silent. But that was not the strangest part. The strangest part was when she finished treating me. I asked her why she had saved my life. Do you know what she said? The cadets waited. She said because I was hurt and she was a doctor. That simple. Like the war did not matter. Like the fact that I had killed human soldiers did not matter. Only that I needed help, and she could provide it. Vexthal began walking again. I was not the only one. Commander Zekthor was captured with severe injuries to his lower body. The humans spent days keeping him alive. They used expensive medicines. They gave him blood transfusions. They even brought in a specialist surgeon from another base. Why would they waste resources on prisoners? Asked a cadet. That is exactly what I wondered. What Commander Zekthor wondered. What all of us wondered. It made no strategic sense. It was not efficient. It was not logical. The commander stopped walking. But humans do not always think about war the way we do. They have ideas about right and wrong that go beyond military necessity. Sergeant Watson told me that her people believe all life has value, even enemy life. Vexthal's voice carried a note of confusion, even after all these years. For 2 weeks, we were prisoners at Proxima Base. 2 weeks of being treated better than some of our own commanders treated us. Good food. Clean medical facilities, recreation time. The humans even let us contact our families to tell them we were alive. That does sound strange, admitted a cadet. It gets stranger. On the 15th day, our sensors detected a massive Zephyrian fleet approaching the base. 3,000 soldiers, heavy weapons, a full counterattack to retake Proxima Base. Vexthal turned to face the cadets directly. General Carter had a choice to make. He could execute the prisoners to prevent us from helping in the attack. He could use us as shields. He could lock us up and let us die in the fighting. All normal tactics that any commander might use. What did he do? He called all the prisoners, together in the main hall. 300 Zephyrian soldiers, some still recovering from wounds, all of us expecting to die. General Carter stood in front of us and made the most shocking announcement I have ever heard in war. The commander's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He said that our people were coming to rescue us. He said that he could not guarantee our safety if we stayed locked up during the battle. So he was going to do something unprecedented. He was going to give us weapons and ask us to help defend the base. Several cadets made sounds of disbelief. Help defend against our own people? One asked. That is exactly what he proposed. General Carter said that his soldiers had treated us with respect and care, that Sergeant Watson and the other medics had saved our lives, that we had been given food and shelter and medical treatment. He asked us to remember that kindness when our people arrived. Vexthal walked to the window and looked out at the stars. He gave us a choice. We could take the weapons and fight alongside the humans against our own forces, or we could take the weapons and join the attack against our captors. He said he would trust us to make the right decision. What did you do? I am ashamed to say that I did not know what to do. For the first time in my military career, I could not decide who was right and who was wrong. The humans had been kind to us, but they were still our enemies. Our people had come to rescue us, but they would probably kill the humans who had saved our lives. The commander turned back to the cadets. Commander Zekthor made the decision for many of us. He stood up and said that honor demanded we protect those who had protected us, even if they were enemies, even if it meant fighting our own people. How many prisoners joined the humans? 87. Almost 1/3 of us chose to fight alongside our former captors against our own rescue force. It was the most shameful and most honorable thing I have ever done. Vexathal's voice was heavy with old pain. The battle lasted 6 hours. Zephyrian forces eventually took the base, but they lost over 1,000 soldiers doing it. Much more than they expected, because 87 of their own people were fighting against them. What happened to the prisoners who helped the humans? Most of us died in the fighting. Commander Zekthor was killed defending the medical station where Sergeant Watson was treating wounded. I was wounded again but survived. When our forces found me, they did not understand why I had been fighting alongside humans. The commander walked back to his desk. I was court-martialed, charged with treason. But something strange happened during the trial. Other prisoners from Proxima Base testified. They told the court about how the humans had treated us, about Sergeant Watson working to save enemy lives, about General Carter trusting us with weapons. Were you convicted? The court could not decide. Half the judges said I was a traitor, half said I had acted with honor. In the end, they reduced my rank but allowed me to continue serving. But the real punishment was living with the knowledge of what the humans had done to us. Vexthal looked directly at the cadets. Do you understand what happened at Proxima Base? The humans turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. They showed mercy when they should have shown ruthlessness. They trusted when they should have suspected. They treated enemies like friends. And it worked? It worked perfectly. Not for winning that battle, but for winning something much more important. They had shown 87 Zephyrian soldiers that humans were not monsters, that they could be honorable even in war, that maybe this war was wrong. The commander's voice grew very quiet. That is the third lesson about human warfare. They do not just fight to defeat their enemies. They fight to change their enemies' minds. They use kindness like a weapon. They turn mercy into a tool of conquest. Looked at each cadet in turn. After Proxima Base, everything changed for me. I still fought against humans, but I no longer believed they were evil. I began to wonder if we were fighting the wrong war, and I was not the only one. The story of Proxima Base spread through our ranks. Doubt spread with it. The old commander walked to the door of the classroom. That is perhaps the most terrifying thing about humans. They can make you question everything you believe about right and wrong. Even in the middle of a war, they can make you wonder who the real enemy is. Commander Vextal stood silent for a long moment after finishing his story about Proxima Base. The cadets could see that the memory still troubled him deeply, but they could also see that he had more to tell them. Something darker, something that frightened even this battle-hardened veteran. "You have learned that humans will sacrifice themselves completely," he said finally. "You have learned that they can endure impossible hardship. You have learned that they can turn mercy into a weapon. But there is one more thing you must understand about humans in war." The old commander's voice grew very quiet, almost a whisper. "Sometimes humans stop being human. Sometimes something breaks inside them, and they become something else entirely. Something that haunts my dreams even now, decades later." A young cadet leaned forward nervously. "What do you mean, Commander?" Vextal walked to his desk and picked up a small metal object. It was twisted and blackened with age. "This is a piece of shrapnel from Titan Mining Station, the bloodiest battle I ever fought. The place where I learned that humans have a switch inside them. A switch that, once flipped, turns them into something beyond rational military calculation." He held the metal fragment up so all the cadets could see it. Titan Station was built inside an asteroid. Miles of tunnels carved from solid rock, perfect defensive position. We had held it for 3 months against repeated human attacks. The tunnels were too narrow for large weapons, too twisted for coordinated assaults, just brutal hand-to-hand fighting in the dark. Vextal set the metal piece down and began his slow walk. The humans sent in special tunnel fighters, small units of soldiers trained for close combat in confined spaces. They had been trying to take the station for weeks, losing soldiers every day in the maze of corridors, but they kept coming. "Why was this station so important?" asked a cadet. "It controlled the shipping routes for an entire sector. Whoever held Titan Station could tax or block trade for dozens of worlds. Both sides needed it. Both sides were willing to pay any price to have it." The commander's voice grew darker. "The human unit I encountered was led by Corporal Danny Rodriguez, 24 years old, third-generation soldier. His grandfather had fought in the First Colonial War. His father had died fighting pirates in the Outer Rim. War was in his blood." Vextal stopped walking and turned to face the cadets. Rodriguez had a squad of 8 soldiers. They had been fighting in those tunnels for 6 days straight, living on emergency rations, sleeping in shifts, breathing recycled air that smelled of blood and explosives, the kind of conditions that break most minds. One of his soldiers was Private Lucy Adams, 19 years old, newest member of the squad. Before the war, she had worked in her family's restaurant on Earth. She joined the military to pay for college. Just a normal young woman trying to build a better life. The commander picked up the metal fragment again and turned it over in his clawed hands. "I was commanding a section of tunnels near the station's main power core. Sub-Commander Thekvar was with me, experienced tunnel fighter. We had 40 soldiers in defensive positions. Good cover, clear fields of fire. We thought we were ready. For anything. The humans came at dawn. Rodriguez led his squad through the service tunnels, trying to flank our main position. Standard tunnel fighting tactics, nothing unusual. We detected them and prepared to engage." Vextal's voice became very quiet. The fighting started normally. Exchange of gunfire in the narrow passages. Both sides using cover, taking careful shots, professional soldiers doing their jobs, but then something happened that changed everything. He set the metal piece down again. "Private Adams was advancing through a side tunnel when one of our plasma mines exploded. The blast caught her completely. I saw it happen through the security monitors. She died instantly. No time to suffer. Quick and clean, as deaths in war go. But Corporal Rodriguez saw it too. He was only 20 meters away when his youngest squad member was killed, and something broke inside him." The cadets leaned forward, sensing that they were about to hear something terrible. Rodriguez let out a sound that I still hear in my nightmares. Not a scream of pain or anger. Something deeper, something primal, like an animal that has been wounded beyond reason. Vextal began walking again, but his steps were unsteady. He dropped his rifle and drew his combat knife. Then he charged straight toward our position. Not tactical movement, not careful advance. just a mad rush through fire that should have killed him instantly. Did your soldiers hit him? They tried. Sub-Commander Tekvar put 3 plasma bolts into Rodriguez's chest. Any other being would have died immediately. But Rodriguez kept coming. The wounds slowed him down but did not stop him. The commander's mandibles clicked nervously. He reached our first defensive position and began killing with his bare hands. His knife broke on Tekvar's armor, so Rodriguez used his fists, and his teeth, and anything else he could find. Several cadets made sounds of shock. I have fought many species in my career. I understand military rage, the anger that comes from seeing friends die. But this was different. Rodriguez was not angry. He was something else entirely. Something that felt no pain and feared nothing. Vexthal stopped walking and faced the cadets directly. Sub-Commander, Tekvar was a veteran of 30 battles, strong even by Zephyrian standards. But Rodriguez killed him with his bare hands, tore out his throat with his fingernails, while taking gunfire from 6 other soldiers. How is that possible? I do not know, but I saw it happen. Rodriguez moved faster than any being should be able to move, stronger than any human should be. Like pain and fatigue meant nothing to him. The commander's voice was barely audible. Now, the other human soldiers saw what was happening to Rodriguez. Instead of trying to stop him or calm him down, they supported him. They channeled their own rage into cold, efficient killing. Like they understood that their leader had become something beyond normal combat, and they needed to protect him. What happened next? Rodriguez fought his way through our entire defensive position. 40 experienced Zephyrian tunnel fighters. He killed 12 of them personally before the rest broke and ran. I was one of the ones who ran. Vexthal walked to the window and stared out at the stars. I have never run from a battle before or since, but there was something in Rodriguez's eyes that was not human anymore, something that made my survival instincts scream at me to flee. Did he survive the battle? Rodriguez lived. The wounds that should have killed him healed. The rage that had consumed him eventually faded. By the next day, he was back to being a normal human soldier, quiet, professional, like nothing had happened. The commander turned back to the cadets. But I learned something about humans that day. They have the capacity to become something beyond their normal limitations. When they lose someone they care about, when they are pushed beyond their breaking point, they can tap into something primal and terrifying. Is this common among human soldiers? Not common, but not rare either. I saw it happen 3 more times during the war, always triggered by the death of someone close, always resulting in impossible feats of strength and endurance, always leaving the other humans ready to support and protect their transformed comrade. Vexthal walked back to his desk. Military strategists call it berserker syndrome. The humans have an old word for warriors who fought in this state. They say it comes from their ancient history when their ancestors fought with primitive weapons. But why did the other soldiers support Rodriguez instead of trying to control him? Because humans understand something about war that other species do not. They know that sometimes the only way to win is to become something more than what you are, even if that something is terrible. The commander looked at each cadet in turn. That is the 4th lesson about human warfare. They have a switch inside them that can turn ordinary soldiers into something beyond rational calculation, and when that switch is flipped, their comrades do not try to turn it off. They protect it. They use it. They turn their friend's madness into a weapon. How do you fight against something like that? You do not, Vexthal said simply. You cannot plan for it. You cannot defend against it. You can only hope it does not happen, and if it does happen, you run. The old commander's voice carried the weight of decades. After Titan Station, our commanders issued new orders. If human soldiers entered berserker state, we were to withdraw immediately. Do not engage. Do not try to contain. Just retreat and wait for the episode to pass. Did this strategy work? Sometimes, but the knowledge that humans could become something beyond normal soldiers changed how we fought them. We became more cautious, more afraid. Fear is a weapon, and humans had learned to use it without even trying. Vexthal looked out the window again. Rodriguez never knew the effect he had on our forces. To him, it was just another battle where he lost a friend and did what was necessary. But to us, it was proof that humans are not entirely rational beings, that they have depths of savagery that civilized species prefer not to think about. The commander turned back to the cadets one final time. Remember this lesson well. Humans are dangerous not just because of their technology or their tactics or their willingness to sacrifice. They are dangerous because they can stop being human when they need to. And when they do, they become something that makes veteran soldiers run in terror. Commander Vextal stood before his cadets one final time. The weight of his memories hung heavy in the air like smoke from a dying fire. 4 stories of human warfare had been told. 4 lessons that challenged everything these young minds thought. They knew about war, but the old commander had one more story to tell, the most important story of all. "You think you understand humans now?" he said slowly. "You have learned about their willingness to die, their impossible endurance, their ability to turn mercy into a weapon, their capacity to become something beyond rational thought. But I have not told you the most terrifying thing about human warfare yet." A young cadet raised her hand nervously. "Commander, what could be more terrifying than what we have already heard?" Vextal's 4 eyes blinked slowly. His mandibles clicked in a way that suggested dark amusement. "The most terrifying thing about humans is not what they do during war. It is what they do after war ends. It is how they think about victory and defeat. It is how they plan not just for battles but for centuries." The commander walked to the center of the room and stopped. "My final story takes place on Neutral Station Alpha, the peace negotiations that ended the Terran Galactic War. I was there, as military advisor to High Chancellor Mordeth, the most powerful leader in Zephyrian history, a being who had conquered 12 star systems and ruled over 50 billion people." He paused and looked at each cadet in turn. "We came to those negotiations, expecting to dictate terms to a defeated enemy. Yes, the humans had fought well. Yes, they had cost us more than expected. But we still held more territory. We still had larger fleets. By any reasonable measure, we were winning the war." "Then why were there peace negotiations?" asked a cadet. "Because the humans asked for them. Admiral Helen Foster sent a message directly to our high command. She said that humanity was ready to discuss ending the war. We thought they were finally ready to surrender." Vextal began his familiar walk across the front of the room. But this time his steps seemed different, more careful, more thoughtful. Admiral Foster was 57 years old. She had been fighting wars for 30 years, started as a junior officer and worked her way up through every rank. She understood strategy better than most of our generals. But more importantly, she understood something that we did not. What did she understand? That war is just one tool among many. That victory in battle does not always mean victory in the larger game. That sometimes the best way to win is to convince your enemy to join you voluntarily. The commander stopped walking and faced the cadets. The human delegation arrived at Neutral Station Alpha with President Tony Clark, 43 years old. A former teacher who had become a politician during the war. He had never been a soldier, never commanded troops, never fought in any battles. We thought this showed that humans were not taking the negotiations seriously. Were you wrong? Completely wrong. President Clark understood something about power that our military leaders never grasped. He knew that the strongest victory is the one where your enemy becomes your ally. Vextal walked to his desk and picked up a datapad. The negotiations began with Admiral Foster presenting the human position. We expected demands for territory, requests for resource rights, complaints about war crimes, the usual things that happen when enemies meet to discuss peace. He looked down at the datapad. Instead, Admiral Foster said something that confused everyone in the room. She said that humanity wanted to help rebuild the worlds that had been damaged during the war, both human worlds and Zephyrian worlds. Several cadets looked puzzled. We thought it was a trick, some kind of negotiating strategy. High Chancellor Mordeth demanded to know what humans wanted in return for this rebuilding aid, what territory they wanted to claim, what resources they wanted to control. What did they want? Nothing. President Clark explained that humanity believed the war had been a misunderstanding, that both species had more to gain from cooperation than from continued fighting, that they wanted to turn former enemies into future allies. Vexthal set the datapad down. High Chancellor Mordauth was furious. He accused the humans of mocking us, of treating serious negotiations like a joke. He said that winners and losers do not become friends. They become rulers and subjects. The commander's voice grew quieter. Admiral Foster listened patiently to the Chancellor's anger. Then she asked a simple question that changed everything. She asked what the Zephyrian Empire would look like in 100 years if the war continued. What kind of question was that? The most important question anyone had asked during the entire war. High Chancellor Mordauth started to give the obvious answer, that we would eventually defeat the humans and expand our empire. But then he stopped, because he realized he could not guarantee that answer. Vexthal began walking again. Admiral, Foster continued asking questions. How many more battles would we have to fight? How many more soldiers would die? How many resources would be consumed? How many years would it take? And most importantly, what would we do with human colonies that refused to surrender? These were military questions, but they were also economic questions, political questions, questions about the future that went far beyond simple battlefield victories. The commander stopped and turned to face the cadets. Then President Clark presented the human alternative: technology sharing programs, joint colonies, cultural exchanges, trade agreements, a future where both species work together instead of fighting each other. Did the Zephyrian leaders accept this offer? Not immediately. High Chancellor Mordauth said that Zephyrians do not negotiate with enemies. We conquer them or we destroy them. There is no middle ground. Vexthal's voice carried a note of sadness. Admiral Foster nodded and said she understood. Then she presented the Chancellor with detailed analysis of every battle fought during the war, casualty reports, resource expenditures, projected costs for continued fighting. The commander picked up the datapad again. The numbers were shocking. Even though we were technically winning, the war was costing us more than our entire empire could sustain long-term. Admiral Foster showed us that humans had been calculating the real cost of war, while we had been focused only on winning battles. What did she mean by real cost? Everything. Not just soldiers killed and ships lost, economic damage, lost trade, disrupted production, political instability, social unrest. The humans had been measuring the war's impact on entire civilizations, while we had been counting only military victories. Vexthal looked directly at the cadets. President Clark explained that this was how humans thought about all conflicts. Not just how to win the current fight, but how to build a better future. After the fighting stopped, they were playing a game measured in generations while we were focused on immediate tactical victories. Did this change the Chancellor's mind? Slowly. Over the course of 3 days, Admiral Foster and President Clark presented their vision for the future: joint research projects, shared colonies, combined military forces for defense against external threats, a galaxy where former enemies worked together for mutual benefit. The commander walked to the window and looked out at the stars. The most disturbing part was how reasonable it all sounded, how logical, how beneficial for both species. The humans had taken everything they learned about us during the war and used it to design a peace that would be impossible to refuse. Did the Chancellor accept? On the 4th day, High Chancellor Mordauth signed the peace treaty. But it was not really a peace treaty. It was an alliance agreement, a plan for the future that would benefit both species more than continued war ever could. Vexthal turned back to the cadets. Within 5 years, joint human Zephyrian colonies were established. Within 10 years, combined research programs had developed new technologies that benefited both species. Within 20 years, it was hard to remember why we had been fighting in the first place. And this was the human plan all along? From the beginning. Admiral Foster later told me that humans had been preparing for peace negotiations before the war even started. They knew that any conflict would eventually end. They wanted to make sure it ended in a way that created allies instead of bitter enemies. The commander walked back to the center of the room. That is the 5th and final lesson about human warfare. They do not fight just to win battles or even to win wars. They fight to win the peace. They think about what happens after victory. They plan for generations ahead. How is this terrifying? Because it means that everything else I have told you was part of a larger strategy. The humans who died rather than surrender were showing us their determination. The humans who endured starvation were proving their strength. The humans who showed mercy to prisoners were demonstrating their honor. The humans who became berserkers were revealing their passion. Vexthal's voice grew very quiet. All of it was designed to convince us that humans would be valuable allies and dangerous enemies. Every battle was also a negotiation. Every act of courage was also a demonstration. Every sacrifice was also an investment in the future. The old commander looked at each cadet one final time. The most terrifying thing about human warfare is that they are always fighting two wars. The obvious war with guns and ships and soldiers, and the hidden war for hearts and minds and futures. They win both wars simultaneously.